I assume hanging on to that means that there's something about what religion has traditionally provided that is provided by religious naturalism.
Mm.
It would not be things like we know for sure that after death you go to heaven if you've been good. I assume that would not be part of it.
Correct.
But consolation about death is one thing religions have done. They've done other things. They've provided moral guidance and so on. So, what parts of traditional religion, what functions of traditional religion, psychological or social, are
Mm.
preserved in religious naturalism?
Mm. If you've got a community of religious naturalists, as I do, a loose-knit community, there are all kinds of social aspects that you would see in ordinary religions that carry over into the religious naturalist environment. There's just common mutual support and so on, but you don't need religions for that type of support. You can get that in lots of different ways from your bowling club or your bridge club or your friends in the neighborhood and so forth. The moral outlook is essentially humanistic. It's a kind of enlightened humanism, I think, that's wide open to the whole natural world and the values inherent in the natural world. And that is in parallel with religion, which gives people moral outlooks. Corresponding to that, there's an obligation. If you have a moral outlook, there's a moral obligation to cultivate personal virtues and social practices and policies that are commensurate with the outlook. And moral virtue cultivation is a very important part of my understanding of religious naturalism and my personal practice as a person. Now, that means both social policies and actions and individual behavior. So they are very important to me.
And what are some elements of the ethical system that you may think are shared by many religious traditions? I mean, is it like selflessness? Is that one, or
Yeah,
what?
it is one. There's an evolutionarily extremely unstable concept that has emerged in most religious traditions having to do with unconditional love or radical love or things like that. There does not appear to be uh, any evolutionary reason for that to appear. There is an evolutionary reason for limited love to appear that enhances cooperation, but the radical love, the extreme love, it's hard to see how that would arise. Nevertheless, it's an idea that's been set loose within humanity, and it's an idea that I endorse and most people do endorse. So I take people like Gautama and Jesus to be models for what it means to be boundary breaking in love and acceptance and community building, for example.
And what are some examples of applying that principle, radical love, in a contemporary context in ways that are boundary breaking? I mean, there are people in the world I could name that most Americans don't love. In fact, there are
Right.
people I could name that most Americans wish they could kill. One of them we did kill a few years ago, Osama bin Laden. I mean, how? And I could name types of people, mass murderers and so on. What are some radical expressions of radical love?
Mm. Uh, Locally, Gautama and Jesus both demonstrated an ability to welcome into friendship people that were often outcast. So I think that's where it begins right there at home. When it comes to social politics, war, and so forth, you've got a balancing act to do. You have to worry about control. You have to worry about power, which are real issues in the world. And you also have to worry about what your private moral compass is. So I'm in conflict there, like most people are, and I have to balance that conflict. So, for example, I'm not a pacifist. I do agree that sometimes it's important to use force to resolve situations. But at the same time, I would try to understand the people that I'm partially responsible for killing as people that I can love. That is very difficult. It requires a kind of disciplined moral practice, but there is actually a tradition among warriors of being able to do that. There's also a tradition among hunters of doing the same thing when you're hunting things that are non-human. So there are virtues that can be cultivated in that regard, and that's truly groundbreaking. Not groundbreaking, I'm sorry, boundary breaking. It's boundary breaking, and
Yeah,
it's
not as boundary breaking as saying don't kill them in some cases. I mean, there are probably
yeah,
people who argue that you're actually abetting the killing if you just by calming the moral qualms that the soldiers may have.
Yes, you are. I think that's true. But what I'm trying to do is to exacerbate the conflict, not squash it. So the practice that I just described forces you repeatedly to confront the conflicted identity of someone who supports war and at the same time insists on loving everyone. Mm-hmm. And so must not let that tension disappear. Otherwise, all you're doing is throwing oil on the water, and it's disguising what's beneath.
And I assume that your reference to embracing outcasts at a local level would include homeless people, former, convicts, prisoners, and so on.
Right, exactly. Widows, orphans, just like Jesus said. It's the sense in which I'm a Christian can be stated precisely like this. I follow Jesus. His moral outlook, his point of view, I follow him as best I can. He and I would disagree over many things, including the conception of ultimate reality that he holds, which is different than mine. But I still endeavour to follow him in what I do, and I also follow Gautama the Buddha in a similar sense. Mm-hmm. So that's the oldest and most traditional understanding of being a Christian, being a follower of Jesus, and that's the one I adhere to.